The forest never welcomed strangers. At least that's what the locals always said. It watches, they would whisper, their eyes darkening whenever outsiders asked about the stretch of woods that clung to the edge of Hollow Creek. To most, it sounded like small-town superstition, a cautionary tale meant to keep children from wandering too far. But to those who stepped inside, the warning was far too real. On an unusually cold autumn evening, 4 friends from the city ignored that warning. Maya, the quiet observer, had been fascinated by the legend ever since she stumbled upon it in an old travel blog. Her brother Daniel, bold and skeptical, dismissed the ghost stories as backwoods theatrics. Chloe, the free spirit, insisted the trip would be an adventure, while Ryan, ever the cautious one, had already regretted agreeing to come. They arrived just before dusk, the last of the sunlight bleeding away behind jagged treetops. The forest loomed before them, its twisted branches like skeletal arms reaching across the sky. The air felt thicker there, as though the trees themselves were exhaling something invisible, something heavy. Even the crickets had gone silent, replaced by a low hum that none of them could place. "Feels off," Ryan muttered, adjusting the straps of his backpack. Daniel chuckled. "It's a forest, not a movie set. You're letting the stories get to you." But Maya didn't answer. She stood at the tree line, staring into the shifting darkness between the trunks. She could have sworn she saw movement, a flicker, a shadow darting just out of sight. The deeper they walked, the more the forest seemed to press in. Paths twisted when they shouldn't, and no matter how carefully they followed the map, nothing lined up. Trees leaned together overhead, blotting out the fading moonlight, while the ground grew damp and uneven. A smell lingered in the air, faint but unmistakable. Something old, metallic, and wrong. Then came the first sign. They found it hanging from a branch, a strip of faded cloth, torn and weathered, as if it had been there for years. Chloe reached for it, laughing nervously. Probably just from some camper. But when she touched it, a cold wind rushed through the clearing, carrying with it a whisper that none of them could fully hear, though each swore later it called them by name. Suddenly, the forest seemed alive. Every crunch of leaves underfoot sounded magnified. Every shadow quivered as if it might break loose from the trees. Daniel finally grew quiet, his bravado waning as even he admitted something wasn't right. They pressed on, refusing to admit fear, until the trail simply ended. What should have been a path opened into a wide circle of dirt, bare and unnatural, as if the earth itself had been burned clean. No grass, no roots, just a void carved out in the middle of the woods. Ryan's voice cracked as he whispered, "We shouldn't be here." And then, without warning, they realized there was no way back. The clearing was too quiet. No insects, no rustle of wind, just the oppressive stillness that pressed on their ears like a weight. The 4 friends stood frozen, each afraid to be the first to admit it. They were lost. Maya broke the silence. Maybe we missed a turn." Her voice was soft, but her eyes darted nervously toward the tree line, where the shadows seemed to pulse in and out of shape. She had always been the curious one, the dreamer, the girl who stayed up late scrolling through forums about urban legends. But she never told the others why the Hollow Creek forest intrigued her so much. She had seen it before, once in a nightmare that felt too real to be forgotten. Daniel brushed a hand through his hair, forcing a smirk. "Relax. We'll figure it out." His confidence felt rehearsed, the same mask he'd worn since their parents' divorce, when he became the older brother who never faltered. But his eyes lingered on the ground longer than they should have, scanning as if expecting to find something buried there. Chloe, restless and jittery, wrapped her arms around herself. She was the wild one, the girl who laughed the loudest and chased every thrill, but tonight the forest seemed to unravel her bravado. She kept glancing at her phone, even though the screen showed nothing but static interference. She hadn't told anyone about the strange text she'd gotten before they left the city. "Don to go where the trees breathe." She thought it was a prank, until now. Ryan stood slightly apart from the others, his shoulders hunched. He had never wanted to come, but he followed Chloe because he always did. The truth was, his fear wasn't the forest. It was being left behind. He didn't speak of the night terrors that plagued him, The ones where he woke up gasping, convinced he was buried alive. But as the group shifted uneasily in the dirt clearing, Ryan felt the same suffocating dread clawing at his chest. The first whisper came just after midnight. They had tried to rest, huddled close in the barren circle, but the silence was too sharp. Then a voice, faint, fractured, slid between the trees. Not loud enough to understand, but close enough to make their hearts seize. Maya swore it called her name. Ryan heard it too, but to him it said, "Don't breathe." The shadows deepened. Shapes moved at the edge of their vision, dissolving whenever they turned to look. Chloe claimed she saw a figure crouching low by the tree line, its limbs too long, its head tilted unnaturally, but Daniel snapped at her to stop. Yet when he lay down, pretending to ignore it, he dreamed of the same thing, a shape with eyes like hollow lanterns watching from the dark. Was it paranoia? Sleep deprivation? The human mind turning against itself? They didn't know. But every minute that passed seemed to peel something away from them. Trust, reason, even memory. The forest wasn't just trapping them, it was unmaking them. By dawn, the air was heavier, the sky darker, though the sun should have been rising. None of them could shake the feeling that they were no longer intruders in the forest. They were prey, and the forest had only just begun to breathe. The moment they stepped inside the cabin, it felt like a mistake. Dust floated in the stagnant air, carrying the smell of mold and something far more sour. While exploring the house, Chloe found a book. Buried under a loose floorboard, its leather cover was cracked and darkened with age. Inside were scattered pages, handwritten in ink that had long since bled across the paper. The words were jagged, frantic, as if carved rather than written. "The house remembers your face." Daniel laughed bitterly. "Local lunatic," he said, though his hands trembled as he turned the pages. The first door slammed at sundown. Then the cabinets burst open on their own, every dish shattering across the floor. That night, Maya dreamed again. She saw the cabin as it once was, warm, lit by lanterns, filled with a family whose faces blurred like melting wax. A man's voice whispered, "The house keeps what the forest cannot." When Maya woke, she found new carvings scratched into the wall beside her sleeping bag. The whispers grew bolder. They slithered through the cracks in the floorboards, repeating names, mimicking voices. And then came the message. While Ryan searched the back rooms, his flashlight flickered and died. When the others found him, he stood frozen in the hall, staring at the wall. Words had been burned into the wood, black and fresh, as if seared by invisible hands. "You will not leave." The cabin should have been a refuge, but it was worse than the forest. By the third night, none of them could sleep. Every creak of the warped floorboards carried the weight of footsteps. Doors slammed in rooms they hadn't entered, and once, while Chloe dozed against the wall, a whisper rose from the cracks in the floorboards, low and urgent, repeating her name until she bolted upright, choking on a scream. Daniel tried to maintain control. He nailed the warped door shut with splintered planks he'd ripped from the furniture, but the pounding started anyway. Not fists, not hands. Something heavier, something deliberate. With every crash, dust shook loose from the ceiling, sprinkling their hair and clothes like ash. "We need to leave," Ryan muttered. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale. "Now, before it decides we can't." "Leave and go where?" Daniel snapped. His voice was ragged, thin from exhaustion. "The forest doesn't let us out." "Then maybe we face it," Maya whispered. The others turned toward her, startled. She hadn't spoken much since they found the mirror, but she couldn't shake the dream that had come to her the night before. A dream where the forest wasn't endless but alive, and something at its heart was calling to her by name. The tension between them cracked like dry wood. Chloe accused Daniel of hiding something, of bringing them here on purpose. Daniel fired back that Chloe was the one who kept seeing things, feeding everyone's fear. Ryan's hands shook as he tried to quiet them, but his voice broke. He was sure the whispers were growing louder, clearer, and last night he thought he heard them speaking in his own voice. The haunting escalated. Objects moved when no one touched them. Knives clattered from the shelves, embedding into the wood just inches from where they stood. Once, in the flicker of candlelight, Maya swore she saw a shadow crouched in the corner of the room, taller than the ceiling, its head brushing the beams. When she blinked, it was gone, but the candle had gone out with it. By dawn, the cabin had turned against them completely. The mirror now showed not just words, but images. Flashes of them, older, broken, wandering the forest as if they had always been there. Chloe covered it with a blanket, but still they heard the scratching underneath, carving messages none of them wanted to read. They had a choice: stay trapped in the cabin, or step back into the forest that had already claimed their path. Neither option promised survival. At last, Daniel ripped the blanket from the mirror. "If it wants us, then let's see it. No more running." His voice trembled, but he stood firm. The others gathered, drawn despite themselves. The glass rippled like water, their reflections warping into shapes not their own. And then, from deep within the reflection, something pressed forward, fingers first, long and wrong, pushing against the glass as though it were skin. The last thing they heard before the mirror cracked was a voice, clear and close this time. "You're already mine." The glass shattered outward. The cabin did not sleep that night. Neither did they. The air grew heavier with each passing hour, thick with the smell of damp soil and iron. The walls groaned as though the house itself was breathing, exhaling rot and despair. Outside, the forest moaned, branches grinding together like teeth. Inside, silence fractured into whispers, then into screams only half the group could hear. Daniel barricaded the front door again, though all of them knew it was pointless. "We waited out. When the sun rises, we leave," he muttered, voice trembling with desperation. But there was no sunrise. The hours dragged, and the sky beyond the shattered window remained black. Time itself seemed to dissolve. Maya sat apart, clutching her knees, whispering to herself. But it wasn't her voice. Her lips moved in rhythms that sounded older than language, syllables scraping from her throat like stone dragged across stone. Chloe stared at her in terror. She's not even her anymore. Ryan shook his head violently. "Stop. That's Maya. She's still in there. We can't give up on her." But even as he said it, his eyes betrayed him. He had seen her reflection in then mirror earlier, her smile stretched too wide, her eyes hollow. The haunting reached its peak when the floor split open. With a deafening crack, the boards beneath their feet buckled. A black void yawned beneath the cabin, and from it surged a chorus of voices, the same voices that had whispered, taunted, begged. Pale hands clawed from the darkness, grasping at ankles, pulling, dragging. Ryan screamed as fingers closed around his leg, cold and wet. Daniel pulled him free, slamming a broken chair leg into the hands until they retreated. But the void did not close. It widened. The house shuddered as reality warped. The furniture twisted, stretching into grotesque shapes, walls elongating like melting wax. The air buzzed with static, and every surface seemed alive with crawling shadows. The message on the wall burned anew, brighter, clearer. "You were always here." The truth tore through them. This was no random trap. The forest had not chosen them by chance. It had always known them, always owned them. Maya rose slowly, her movements stiff, inhuman. The whispers poured through her now, no longer hiding. "It doesn't matter how far you run." Her voice layered with dozens of others, old and broken. Chloe screamed and swung a lantern at her, shattering it against the wall. Fire burst, licking across the rotted boards, but instead of burning, the flames sank into the wood, vanishing as if swallowed. The house rejected even destruction. Daniel grabbed Maya by the shoulders, shaking her. "Fight it, please, you're my sister." For a flicker of a moment, her eyes cleared, Maya's eyes wide with terror. "Danny," she whispered. Then the darkness surged back, stronger, her face twisting into a smile that wasn't hers. The cabin shook violently, the void beneath them roaring like a storm. Ryan pointed to the door, now standing wide open on its own, the forest outside darker than ever. "It's giving us a way out," he shouted, but Daniel froze, still holding Maya. Chloe grabbed his arm, pulling desperately. "She's gone. We have to leave." Maya tilted her head, grinning through tears that weren't her own. "There is no leaving." The ground gave way beneath them, the void consuming the cabin whole. Their screams were swallowed by the forest, and as the world collapsed, the last thing they saw was their own faces, etched into the walls of the house, waiting for the next travelers who would never escape. The cabin convulsed as if it had a heartbeat. Floorboards buckled, dust swirled in choking clouds, and every wall screamed with the voices of the lost. Daniel clutched Maya by the shoulders, shaking her. "Fight it! You're stronger than this! Don't let it win!" But the words were drowned by the cacophony pouring from her throat. Her eyes rolled white, her voice layered with hundreds of others. The forest keeps what it claims. The forest keeps what it claims. Ryan stumbled back, tears streaking his face. "She's gone, Dan. Look at her. She's not your sister anymore." His voice cracked. He sounded like a child pleading with a parent. Chloe's panic had curdled into fury. "We can't save her. We have to end this. If we don't. She grabbed a broken beam from the wreckage, raising it like a weapon. Daniel blocked her path, rage and desperation warring in his eyes. "You touch her, and I'll—" Before he could finish, the house erupted. The floor split wide, opening into a pit of writhing roots and pale hands, all reaching, all grasping. The smell of damp earth and rot rushed up like a tide. Ryan fell to his knees, clutching his head. "It's inside all of us. Don't you feel it?" The walls stretched and warped, symbols burning themselves into the wood, glowing red as if seared by an unseen fire. The same spirals and circles Chloe had found in the book, only now they weren't warnings, they were invitations. The whispers coalesced into one terrible voice, booming through the cabin and their bones. "You were always here." Maya convulsed, then stilled. Slowly, impossibly, she rose into the air, her feet dangling above the broken floorboards. Her eyes snapped open, black as the void yawning beneath them. She looked at each of them in turn, Daniel's horror, Chloe's rage, Ryan's hopelessness, and smiled. "You think you found the forest," she said, her voice both hers and not hers. "But the forest found you." Daniel's grip faltered. For the first time, he didn't recognize his sister. He recognized only the thing wearing her skin. Chloe raised the beam again, but before she could strike, the room bent. Walls stretched outward like melted wax, the ceiling vanishing into endless dark. Doors opened onto nothing but more trees, infinite and suffocating. The cabin wasn't a cabin anymore. It was the forest's heart, alive and awake. Ryan crawled toward the open doorway, where a faint glow flickered. Moonlight. Salvation. "There! We can still get out!" he screamed. But as he reached it, the doorway snapped shut, sealing him inside. The glow died. They were trapped. Maya's body descended slowly, her bare feet touching the warped floor. She looked at them with that same unnatural smile. "You were never meant to leave," she whispered. "You only came home." The roots surged upward, wrapping around their ankles, their wrists, dragging them toward the pit. Daniel shouted Maya's watching. Forever. The silence after the collapse was worse than the screams. No more pounding on the walls. No more whispers clawing at their ears. Just stillness, as though the forest had swallowed the cabin and all its horrors whole. When Daniel opened his eyes, he was lying in damp leaves. The cabin was gone. The ground where it once stood was bare earth, covered in moss and ash. Moonlight filtered through the trees, pale and indifferent. For a moment, he wondered if he had dreamed it all. But then he heard Chloe's raged sobs. She was alive, too. Mud streaked across her face, her hands scraped raw. She clutched her side where a root had torn her shirt open, leaving a livid bruise. Her eyes were hollow, staring at nothing. Ryan sat a few feet away, trembling, arms wrapped tight around himself. None of them spoke Maya's name, because Maya wasn't there. Daniel searched the clearing, calling for her until his throat burned. But all he found were carvings in the dirt, spirals and circles pressed deep into the soil as if burned there by unseen hands. The same symbols that had filled the walls of the cabin. His sister's voice echoed faintly in his head. "You only came home." By dawn, they stumbled back into Hollow Creek. The forest, once endless, now seemed small, ordinary. Locals found them on the roadside, disheveled and half-crazed, muttering about shadows and whispers. The sheriff filed a report. 4 young adults lost in the woods, but there were only 3 to return. No one believed them when they spoke of the cabin. They called it hysteria, trauma, exhaustion. The sheriff dismissed it as a trick of the woods. But Daniel, Chloe, and Ryan knew. The forest had taken Maya, and worse, it had marked them too. In the weeks that followed, each of them carried scars no one else could see. Chloe heard laughter in her apartment at night, her own laughter echoing from the dark corners. Ryan woke up every morning with soil under his fingernails and dreams of being pulled underground. Daniel found himself staring at mirrors too long, waiting for his reflection to move on its own. They tried to return to normal, but normal no longer wanted them. The forest had followed. Some nights, Daniel dreamt of going back, of tearing through the woods to find Maya, to bring her home. But he knew the truth. She wasn't lost. She had become part of the forest, its vessel, its voice. And if he went back, he wouldn't be rescuing her. He'd be joining her. The curse wasn't broken. It never had been. Maya's face appeared sometimes, in the corner of their vision, in the static of a phone screen, in the window's reflection when the lights flickered, smiling, watching, waiting. The 3 who returned carried the story, but none of them dared tell it fully, because they understood now why the locals warned them never to enter Hollow Creek. The forest doesn't need to find you twice, it only needs to wait.